Hi, I'm Tammy Potter, and welcome to the Pregnancy Process Podcast, a show designed to help you navigate the hugely transformative journey to motherhood, where you'll hear the unique experience of experts in this area and the incredible stories of women sharing their conception, pregnancy, and postnatal journeys so that you can have a healthier, more informed pregnancy. In today's episode, I'm joined by the incredible Emma Smith, who shares her deeply personal and inspiring journey to motherhood through donor eggs. After enduring years of unsuccessful IVF treatments and multiple miscarriages, Emma found herself at a crossroads, grieving the loss of one dream while daring to hope for another. In this deeply moving episode, Emma takes us inside this transformative chapter of her life, from navigating the emotional complexities of choosing donor eggs to traveling to South Africa for treatment. She reflects on the delicate balance between grief and hope, the ethical considerations of selecting a donor, and how she embraced the role of epigenetics in shaping her son's development beyond genetics. This conversation is raw, heartfelt, and filled with wisdom. Whether you're exploring alternative paths to parenthood or simply looking for inspiration in overcoming life's challenges, Emma's story will leave you feeling moved and empowered. Emma, thank you so much for your time today. It's fantastic to have you here with us.
Thanks, Tammy. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this podcast. It's been a while in the making, so I'm definitely excited to get into all of these questions.
Yeah.
And I think the best place to start, because it's been a bit of a journey for you. I know having Monty in your arms has been a journey. And I think I'd like to start at the beginning, at that point where you realized that donor eggs may be the best option for you. How did you navigate the emotions that came with that decision? And how did you even get to that decision?
Yeah. Okay. So that's certainly challenging my mind to go back to a place. I was completely against any other means of having a baby other than naturally being biologically my egg and my husband's sperm. And I suddenly had a third miscarriage in February 2023. And a day after that miscarriage, my husband had immediately gone out and made contact with an agency that could facilitate egg donor. And in a very split short moment of time where I'd gone from just thinking we were potentially going to have a baby again and it being my egg to my husband presenting this information, I was in this sort of delicate space between grieving something, but also still having that bit of hope. I was still familiar with this sort of feeling of hope. And I was quickly presented with this other option of hope. And I think as soon as I opened my heart and opened the email, the information that my husband sent me, I wasn't going back from there. As soon as I started to look, I was like, I can't close this door. I'm open. And it's thinking about it now, it's because I was straddling grief and hope in a very sort of short period of time.
That's quite a common theme, I believe, with women that have gone through multiple rounds of IVF, they've had multiple miscarriages, all that type of thing. And I'm sorry that you've had that journey to get there, because I can't even imagine what one miscarriage would have been like, but 3. So was there IVF involved previously, or were they natural conceptions?
Yeah, I had 4 rounds of IVF, but none of those ever translated to pregnancy. My 3 pregnancies were all naturally conceived. So I naturally got pregnant in 2019, and then 6 months later again in 2020. We then went through a period of 4 rounds of IVF, and only one of those rounds of IVF produced an embryo that we had transferred, and that wasn't successful. And then I basically stopped trying for, I think, a period of 2 years and basically just committed to closing the door completely. So I had a very long period of grief in that time where I just tried to bring acceptance to the fact it wasn't going to happen, and decided not to try any further IVF, and then naturally conceived again, and that was the third miscarriage. So yeah, IVF was completely unsuccessful for us. All of my pregnancies were naturally conceived.
And in terms of how did you get to the point that you knew that it was, because obviously fertility, it's a combination of male and female. How did you
Mm,
get to the
mm.
point of going to donor egg versus, let's say, donor sperm?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And there's so much beneath the surface when you start scratching at the fertility surface. So
Mm.
I think because of what I started to learn through getting IVF and through seeing an obstetrician through my miscarriages and reading, and started to understand that I had a lot of eggs. Every time I had a huge amount of eggs, but it was the quality of the eggs. And I began to understand that the quality of the eggs would continually impact the ability for those eggs to last. So due to my age, that the quality was never going to get past kind of those initial few weeks. There was always chromosome issues, and each of those miscarriages I had, I did have the D&C, and I did have it removed, and I did have everything tested. So I was able to get advice on what had gone wrong.
Mm.
And in a nutshell, the obstetrician's advice was just that the chromosome incompatibility of my egg and my husband's sperm would very likely continue to mismatch due to the age of my egg. So prior to commencing the journey, or just going back to when I started IVF, so I got pregnant twice, didn't think there would be any issues. At that point, we got advice and tried IVF and had my husband's sperm all tested. So whilst he is also similar age, a little bit older than myself, he didn't identify there to be any real concerns as why we wouldn't be able to conceive with his sperm. It wasn't the same perhaps as somebody much younger, but I don't think that really answers your question, because there was never anything definitive to say that it wasn't having donor sperm wouldn't make a difference per se to match with my egg, but there was a very strong indication, let's say, that the age of my eggs would continue to be the challenge.
Mm. It's interesting the chromosomal mismatch that's happening there as well, isn't
Mm.
it? Like it's such a fine line, isn't it? And it's a very interesting journey, and one that has ended very happily for you, of
Absolutely.
course. But of course there would have been some fears and hesitations around using a donor egg. How did you
Mm.
overcome that? Because it almost sounds like one door closed, or exactly like you're saying, you're straddling with one foot one
Mm.
in that kind of grief and one foot in the hope, and somewhere in there was a turning point.
Yeah, I think I feel really lucky that I never had any fears around how I would feel about my child. I've got quite a number of friends who have either had egg donor, sperm donor, or embryo donor.
Mm.
So I've witnessed enough to know that there is any emotional concern around connection with child and those things. It didn't really pop up for me right until the very end of the pregnancy, which was very strange. Then I started to have concerns, let's say, but my fears at the beginning were more around how I could calibrate in my head the feeling around the process. Egg donor in Australia is, as I understand, altruistic. And we went and did egg donor overseas. And egg donor, there is multiple options. I don't know all of them, but I am aware of the World Egg Bank and having frozen eggs and purchasing that way. And we wanted to, once we understood that you could go where it was natural, it wasn't frozen, it was all live, so to speak, and that's the way that we wanted to do it because it increased our chances of having a baby. My my fears were wrapped up in who the egg donor was and what type of life they were living, and what position they are in their life to and motivate them to donate their eggs.
Let's explore that then a little bit, because you've actually opened up my next question, which is around the experience of using donor
Mm.
eggs. And what was it actually like choosing a donor, and
Mm.
what traits and qualities mattered to you the most during that
Mm.
selection
Yeah.
process?
Look, it was exciting, to be honest, because it was attached and connected to this possibility of having a baby. So each step, whilst it was overwhelming to some degree, it was also very exciting, but also surreal. So choosing an egg was, in practical terms, was accessing a website and going through multiple profiles of people. And in those profiles, there was a couple of images of the egg donor as a child. So the photographs was the child was never more than 12 years old. You couldn't see what the egg donor looked like as an adult, but it would list through their star sign, eye color, school grades, health, a whole list of very detailed report about them as individuals. And what was important to me and my husband was we really wanted them to have dark hair. We both have dark hair. So, I have dark eyes. I chose a egg donor with dark eyes. Monty has beautiful grey blue eyes. So, that's not turned out. But then equally, now it's perfect. So I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. So it was really important to look at the health of the donor and their parents and their grandparents. That's probably the most critical thing. And you can only trust the information to a certain degree. It was detailed, but it wasn't by looking at a professional report. So you can only believe what you can see. So things like height, weight, health, those things, because in my mind that might inform how tall, small Monty will be as an adult. And things like academic records, someone who might love English versus loving physical education, like I was interested in those things. And I guess there's only so much you can tell of what somebody's character is going to be like based on the preferences. So I didn't worry too much about what their favorite movie was or what their favorite food was, or star sign, those sorts of things. It was very much the biological traits that I was looking at and the physical traits.
And you mentioned lifestyle before, the lifestyle of the donor. Were you
Mm.
able to get information around that? Because I feel that would be something quite important to me as well. What's their everyday life and lifestyle like?
Yeah, so it's limited. I think there's two parts to that. One, for me, I was interested in their lifestyle from the perspective of I was hopeful that the person donating their egg wasn't living in extreme poverty and that this was a way of them getting money to survive or to live, or because that's quite a sad, difficult thing to think about, that I didn't want to be gaining from someone's personal difficulties. That was my bottom line, if that makes sense. But equally, there has to be some gain for someone to do it. The agency that I was working with, they gave me a lot of comfort in how they very carefully selected and contacted people to try. I don't know a lot about the process. I just know that it's a very detailed sort of screening process. In the report, it does share what that person's doing for a job, and it shares what their parents do for a job. So if they're studying or if the individual is working in a clerical job or something else, and a little bit of detail about their family. So those things were important. In terms of anything beyond that, it's anonymous. There's a lot of paperwork to be signed that basically states there is zero contact. We live in different countries. And the only bit of information I could really glean was when we went to South Africa, which is where we went, to Cape Town. The very first time I met the doctor at the clinic, being me, I'm curious, and I did say that the donor had been in that morning because we were on the same menstrual cycle. They were seeing this person simultaneously to me. And I just said to the doctor, what is she like? Can you share anything about this person? And they just simply said that she was a very sweet lady and a very nice, sweet person, and lived sort of an hour or so out of Cape Town in a mountainous area, and was a very sweet, nice, kind person. So that's actually what I hold on to more than the other stuff.
And just thinking back to another guest that I've had on here where they chose their donor, the sperm donor for this one, but chose their donor by their reasons why they were donating their sperm. Did you get that?
No, it wasn't. No, it was different. There is a financial exchange. Yeah,
I see.
yeah. So um, not that even if there is a financial exchange, there still has to be a motivation for someone to still feel comfortable to do it. But I think it's a different circumstance.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think what you said previously about how important it was for you to ensure that the person donating wasn't living in poverty and that they weren't doing this because they had to. I think that also really goes to that whole epigenetic side of things, which you and I will get into a little bit later, because the impact and stress, or the impact that stress has on our bodies, on how our genes express, on our egg quality, all that type of thing. I can imagine that someone that was in a situation and they were living in poverty where this was like an option to help them, I can imagine that potentially there would be some flow through to the quality of the eggs. Like I would have to ask an expert on that. And the only reason why I'm thinking of this is because I'm listening to Gabor Mate's book at the moment, which talks all about intergenerational trauma and all that type of thing. So while that was important to you from a personal perspective, when you look at it from a bigger picture, it's also important as well, I think.
Yeah, no, look, it absolutely is. I think for me, it was obviously, I don't disagree. I know the intergenerational trauma and I understand how, the flow through. And I suppose then the flip side of that is nurture versus nature. And there's no doubt in my mind that Monty will be carrying DNA and tissues from many different scenarios in life, but I think we all do as well. I think we've been here many times before. I think that whatever that looks like for him, the environment that he's in, balance or support, any of those things, I think it was just a very deep moral thing for me to not want to gain from someone's difficulties.
Yeah.
That was where that was playing out from. And I will never know the truth of someone's personal circumstance. I just have to trust that we are where we are for good reason.
And can you just, from a high level, can you walk us through the actual medical process? Because we'll get into a little bit more around the pregnancy and bonding type of things. But I think people might quite like to hear about the actual medical process, because from where you've led us now, you're now in South Africa. You and your egg donor are on matching cycles. They've gone into the clinic. You've gone in there a few hours later and they've
So prior to getting to the clinic, once we'd secured a donor, it's a 3-month lead up. That's the shortest time it can happen in, and that's what we wanted. So I went on a 12-week medical drug protocol where I was taking lots of medication to help my body prepare to then hold the baby. So I was having 15 tablets a day. And as I said, the menstrual cycle was matched through me going on the pill, the donor going on the pill. We then travelled to Cape Town, and I was having blood tests. The egg donor was having blood tests to see specifically where we were in our cycle. Very similar to the IVF process. Essentially, for the egg donor, she would have been going through a very similar protocol as an IVF to produce lots of eggs and to be able to tell exactly when was the best time to retrieve the eggs. So we would wait for that call. We were in South Africa for a period of time that would allow enough time to get the call to then go in on the day, which was egg retrieval. And the day of egg retrieval was also the day that my husband would go and provide his sperm. So literally a matter of hours in between. And then the sperm and the egg is taken off the same way it is in IVF. And then we wait 5 days to see how many embryos were going to be assessed as suitable. So we go in, we do the whole initial part. We then wait 5 days. We couldn't go too far out of town. We got the call, we go back in for our appointment. And throughout those 5 days, we were getting lots of updates from the labs, again, as you do in IVF, to say, like, we started with, I think, 13 embryos. And day 5, we went in and they assessed, there was, I think, 8 left. And they assessed the top 3. And they have my understanding that in South Africa, their technology is very advanced. So the whole grading that they have for the embryos it's incredible. It was far superior to the experience that I'd had here in Australia. And then the question was, did I want to have 1 or 2 embryos transferred? Which again is not something I believe you can do here in Australia. So we decided that we would have 2. So of those, the top 3, we had the top 2 transferred in exactly the same way that you would do here in Australia. So I think we've gone Saturday morning, exactly, all very timed, very carefully. I continue having blood tests throughout to check all my hormone levels, and the transfer occurs. And then we, I suppose, free technically to leave South Africa, which we didn't do. We stayed around for a short while, just stayed in close contact with the hospital. But in terms of process, it's very similar as the IVF process, except for that whole lead up part. It was not my body it wasn't my eggs that were taken out, it was somebody else's. And in that room, in that laboratory that morning, it was a different egg that was put in.
Isn't that incredible? I think it's just amazing. Like, I love medical technology. I think it fascinates me so much, especially around fertility. But I just think it's incredible that you can get 2 women's cycles matching through medication. Isn't that just crazy?
In other parts of the world, and we are living these, exactly, it is. And then just the whole administrative side of things and the coordination. And I think it's really important to call out that the care that is provided to myself and hopefully to the egg donor is incredible. That's really important as well, that someone is made to feel calm and supported and cared for at all times throughout this process, because you feel like on a knife's edge the whole time.
Is there anything through that journey up to this point before we move into the pregnancy? Is there anything that kind of stood out or surprised you along the way that you were like, oh, I didn't think I'd feel that way about this? Or
I think it's a really good question. I think the only thing, it did feel quite intimate. The clinic was a small clinic. There was a lot of, I could see other people in a similar boat. But I think what was quite beautiful or exciting in a way, like, I felt excited to know that the egg donor had been, like, in that same waiting room as me an hour or so ago. I felt very connected to them and would have liked to have seen, it's sort of in a strange, I can't quite make sense of why, but I wanted that in a way. I don't know how I would have felt if I'd had that introduction. And that's what a lot of people on the egg donor journey do, have that relationship with someone. I think it's because I couldn't have it. Maybe I wanted it, but I was just surprised to feel a closeness to the person.
I think that's quite beautiful that you felt close to them. It's got a bit of a sliding doors feel to it, but it's quite beautiful that you did actually feel some kind of closeness to this person, and you would, because they're giving you a gift, right?
Yeah,
like you'd
probably, and it's an energetic thing. We had at some point crossed the same energy by being in the same room or speaking to the same doctor, and I think that's what it was. We have shared the same air somewhere along the line.
That's cool. Now let's talk about the pregnancy, because research does show that the mother's uterine environment and factors like diet and stress and health can influence how a baby's genes are expressed through epigenetics, which is what we've entered into before. So how does it feel knowing that you actually have played a really important role in shaping your son's development beyond genetics?
Look, I think on one hand, it concerns me because it was a really stressful time. We were having a lot going on at home at the time, so I was carrying a lot of stress. So I felt concerned to some degree, but equally, I felt very connected very early on, and that it was, even though we were having house renovations and I felt like my external environment was quite challenging, I felt like I did do everything I could to protect what was going on inside me. And I was I rationalized my emotions a lot. So I was, I don't feel, maybe you or my husband would tell me differently, but I felt like I was quite robust and stoic to some degree. I think I feel like I did the best that I could, but at the very end of the pregnancy, I obviously became more emotional, and I did do a bit of energy work, and obviously I did a lot of physical work with you just to try and create space to connect with Monty. So I feel so connected with him now, and I don't feel, I think I did the best in the situation that I could do, and he is an extremely happy, smiley, beautiful boy, and it's all about the now, really.
And for those listening, you've probably picked up that Emma and I worked together throughout her pregnancy and still do. So I trained her through her pregnancy. And yeah, and I remember that there were periods where you needed to clear some of the energy that you were feeling and the stress that you were feeling, and just really, I guess, ground into the process. Because I think there were some moments where the process and knowing that you had used a donor egg, you needed to just really connect with that, but also connect with your decisions and that type of thing. And you'd
Yeah.
be better at explaining that. But I do remember there were just a couple of moments, and you're right, towards the end of your pregnancy, that you really needed to process what that meant for you.
Yeah. I think two factors really. I tried to treat things in a very transactional way as a way of managing my emotions. So I'd had a lot of grief around the miscarriages, and then acceptance from 2019 so it was a 5 year, it was a 4.5 year journey end to end. So for 4 of those years I was in some sort of grief, really. And my way of, I tried to contain that. I didn't want any of that spillage or overflow to come onto Monty, so I really tried to contain that. And also I was very fearful until really he was born. I still carried we tried to preserve ourselves and try to manage expectations. So there was always in my mind, I cried at every scan and would feel extremely anxious before every scan, because I'd had so many scans where we discovered that the baby wasn't there. So it really, I didn't allow myself to emotionally connect until the very end, I think, which is exactly what you're saying. And then obviously towards the end, started to feel guilty that I hadn't done that. But it was just, it was everything. It was trying to manage the grief, allow myself to believe it might happen, and be prepared in case it didn't happen.
It always makes me so sad when women have experienced miscarriage, and even one miscarriage, but multiple miscarriages. But it really does make me sad, because it does rob women of an aspect of joy. And just hearing you say that every scan you went into, and you would never enabled yourself to really connect and experience that joy until you had him in your arms. But I don't know, maybe on the flip side of that, I'd like to think that all of that joy burst out of you when you had him.
It absolutely did. It absolutely did. Absolutely. And still, there's still like the disbelief. So yeah, I think it probably balances out in the end. And I'll always think that initial joy, like the very first time I got pregnant and the very first time I saw a scan with a heartbeat with that very first baby, that joy, like you're never going to have that same feeling again, because that was the first time you had the feeling. It's the first sip of wine tastes better than the second sip of wine. It's all those first. So I had to believe, and things are experienced and play out the way that they should. And yes, the emotion poured out for Monty, because it was the relief, it was the joy for him, and it was just in overflow for a very long time.
I'm glad you had that, because a 4.5 year journey that's taken you to different continent. And that's a lot. Multiple miscarriages, rounds of IVF, 5 years. And I appreciate that you're sharing that with me and the audience, because it's so personal, and it's a lot. It's a long time. 4.5 years is a long time. But then the fact that there's this amazing joy at the end of it, and how wanted he is and how wanted he was and all that kind of thing. I think there's real beauty in that as well.
Yeah.
In terms of your pregnancy, let's talk about how you managed to connect with him right at the end, because I know you said it wasn't until the end that you were that you actually even allowed yourself to connect with him. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, no, I always felt connected with him. What I didn't feel, like, I always felt a physical connection. So, obviously we trained, and I did quite a bit of swimming, and swimming was very much when I look back now, that's when I really used to talk to him, and I felt like he almost talked back to me. That was a very meditative experience. So I always felt really. Quickly jumping to something else. I thought I was having a girl, so we did a gender reveal and ordered a cake, and I had my results sent to the bakery, and the bakery made a cake, and they made a pink cake. So 2.5 days or so, we thought we were having a girl, and did a online gender reveal with about 25 people in the UK. And then we looked at the results ourselves, the ones that I'd sent to the bakery, and it said male. So the bakery got things wrong. But the point of this story is that when I could see it was a boy, I just remember walking through Bondi Junction. I was going to work, and I was like, "You're a boy. Sorry, we got you wrong." In that moment, I was like, "This is so right." I felt absolutely everything was meant to be. How it was meant to be, and felt very connected with him. It wasn't until the end that I felt like I could open up space in my heart and my mind to truly appreciate what we'd been through, get to that, and truly appreciate the process. And instead of just like, step one, get on a plane to Cape Town, step two, go to the hospital. Like, it was all a project. I just treated it like a project timeline, and not allowing for what else might come in from an emotional perspective. And then that was when I felt it was really important to do something else. And I did go, and I had a lot of acupuncture and did some energy work as well to really create space and actually work with the practitioner. I only had the one session where whether people believe, like, she was communicating with him and then communicating back to me what he was communicating. Just, I really wanted him to know that he was deeply wanted. And whilst I had been very transactional in my approach throughout, that the emotions were there and available. It was just me not wanting to be too gutted at the end if it didn't all work out.
You can see that too, right? You can understand why you might approach something in that removed kind of third person kind of way. So then if it does, you've got a bit of emotional protection over your heart.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wasn't detached from him. I always felt very connected to him in the evenings, in the mornings when they kick and all of those things. And he was already very much an entity, and I spoke to him and it felt very there. For me, it was more about respecting and really appreciating everything we'd been through to get there. And that was the missing part that I hadn't really honoured. That was my wording. I didn't feel like I was honouring it until the end. Yeah.
Incredible. That's looking back on that journey. How do you feel about these decisions now that he's here? Has becoming a mother through donor eggs changed how you view yourself or motherhood as a whole? That's quite a big question.
Yeah, I feel really proud. I feel really proud of him. I feel really proud of my husband and I that we managed to get through it.
Mm.
And I think the other thing that makes it, in my personal situation, Monty was very much wanted by us, but also the broader family. For my side of the family, he's the only grandchild. So he is a much wanted baby, and we've just come back from our second trip to the UK, and he's just adored by so many people. And I really believe that there's a lot of people hoping and praying for us. And I think the collective conscious sort of together we all did it thing. I genuinely believe that our happy ending was, it's the hard work that we did, but I had such a lot of support. We don't have any family here, so when I say support, emotional support,
Mm.
and people really cheering us on. And so my reflections are, I'm just very proud that he's an egg donor baby, and I feel my apprehension if there is just things are great now and I just don't yet know how I'll be able to talk to him about it. There's lots of tools and resources, and I have lots of friends who have been through it. I suppose I just haven't yet let myself emotionally engage in what that next step will look like.
Mm.
How much to keep alive his heritage in a way, because that's something we often think about. Is the egg donor is from South Africa, so we like to have animal themes, for example. I don't know if that makes sense. I want to keep this sort of thing alive, if that makes sense, his heritage
Mm.
alive. I don't quite know what all of that will look like. I feel very proud of him. And for so many years, and there'll be so many people who are in the same boat, just think it's never going to happen.
Mm.
And I got so many people tell you to keep trying, and you just shut off from it because it just seems an impossibility. And that was me for a very long time. It's an impossibility. So
I just love that. Before we go on to the next question, because you've opened it up so beautifully, but I just want to touch on the collective consciousness because I just love that idea. I think it's just beautiful. But you've just mentioned other women and, that the way that it's looked at. What advice would you give to women that were considering donor eggs but actually struggling with the emotional aspects of the decision? Are there, you've talked about your family network. Are there other resources or support networks that help you,
yeah,
or what advice would you have for them?
there's obviously in this situation, it'd be really recommended to have professional counseling to prepare for something or to talk through those things. And I got a huge amount of comfort from the organization that we were working with, in that it felt very bespoke. It was very well organized. It's a very small organization. They have supported 1,000 families to have babies, and they had a very high success rate. So I suppose I took a bit of comfort from a statistic, if you like, that 69% of their clients had been successful. From an emotional perspective, I think it's very personal. I was firmly of the view it was not for me. It was just not for me. So I think my advice is, or suggestion to anyone, would just to try and be open. And when, like, I think it's the same with anything in life, you can think that a door is firmly shut, and then it surprises you that something can actually become a potential. I think we all know ourselves. I think that was what was good for me. I know myself quite well as well. It was just literally just putting one foot in front of the other each day. And I had to have lots of other things going on, so I wasn't entirely consumed by this.
Quite good advice, I think.
It's easy to go down rabbit holes. Like, my mind would go down a rabbit hole constantly, but there were so many other things that I had to keep pulling me back out. I had to keep pulling me back out and deal with what needed to be done at the time. And I didn't fixate too much on the what ifs and buts and what would he look like and how would it feel and those types of things. It was just very much going to remain dealing with what needed to happen at the time and keeping busy.
Now, you also mentioned Monty's heritage and how you're going to incorporate that
Mm,
into his upbringing, and you've mentioned animal themes and all that type of thing.
mm,
Have you thought a little bit about how or when you're going to, if you're going to tell him, how you're going to tell him, when you're going to
yeah,
tell him about his conception story, and
yeah,
what kind of values or messages are the most
yeah.
important to you to share with him about how he was brought into this world?
So I think, again, because I do have a lot of friends who have been in similar situations, I've got a lot of people who've been through this and have already talked to my best friend about it. In that we in England, there's lots of resources, and I think English sort of medical resources are quite useful. I feel like they've done a lot of things sometimes before Australia. So what I'm advised to do, or what's been encouraged, is to tell a child as soon as possible, as soon as they have some ability to understand, and to make it very simplistic and practical. That to make a baby, there needs to be a womb and an egg and a sperm, and mummy had the womb and daddy had the sperm, and we needed help with the egg. And that would be like the first sort of stage of trying to explain that we had someone help. And then over time, I think I will probably access some professional support on how to delve deeper with Monty, because I don't want to project my needs around it on him. Like, I am naturally a very curious person, so I think there's something beautiful in continuing his heritage and me. But am I just forcing that connection? I look at him and I think that he does look South African, and the egg donor was South African Dutch. So in my mind, I already picture him as a big rugby player and all of these things in my mind. And I like thinking that. I'm happy to think that. It doesn't upset me. I'm proud of him no matter what. But that's my take on things. So I think I'm going to get some support in trying to get the balance right. So starting with the simple, important information. But the most important thing is how much he was wanted and how loved he is, and that we're a family.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's no denying that. After a 4.5 year journey that takes you to another
Mm,
continent, there's absolutely no
mm,
denying that. And just in terms of like difficult questions from other people, have you
mm.
had any slightly confronting moments, or have you had any kind of pushback from people around you that maybe landed in a way? I'm not sure. Have you had?
Not really. I think nothing really stands out. I think we're already part of a blended family. I have a stepson who's 12, and I think that we our focus is so much on bringing Monty into a loving environment that there's not. I think I've been so open from the beginning. I don't feel that there's anything that's been confrontational
Mm,
for me. The only thing that kind of I think that I would feel conflicted by, or would be funny, is having a donor egg doesn't mean he has a donor mum. It's not like a. I think it's just, if ever that term would come up, I would find that difficult. He doesn't have a biological mum. He has a mum, and the egg is donated. But no, I haven't had anything that I've felt too worried by.
I love that. Just because he was a donor egg doesn't mean he has a donor mum. I think that's
Mm,
such a beautiful, succinct way of looking at it. It just encapsulates that whole feeling, because it
mm,
doesn't mean that he's got a donor mum. He has a mum
no.
that absolutely adores him. So I think that way of looking at things is beautiful. And say, for women who may feel disconnected due to the
Mm,
lack of genetic link, what would you say to them to reassure them about their role in their child's life and
mm,
development? Is there anything more that you could add? Because I feel like the donor egg, donor mum answers that question, but is there anything more that
yeah.
you'd like to add?
The only thing that comes up for me, Tammy, I would say, is like, to dig deeper into why they're having that feeling. Like, I can only imagine that's coming from somewhere else. Go inwards. And what's there when we have these concerns or feelings? It's a fear, isn't it? And it's a fear within self more so perhaps than somewhere else. So if it's a disconnect, if you feel a disconnection to the baby, or you have a fear of feeling disconnected should you go through donor egg, then explore what that fear is, because it could be something completely different, and that could be getting in your way of having your baby and your family you seek.
I love that so much, because it is such a transformation becoming a parent. And within that transformation, there is a lot of stuff that comes up and I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, in the program. You get a lot of parenthood, childhood information coming up that needs to be processed. How you were parented, what you would do differently,
Absolutely.
what your childhood was like. Do you want to have your child to have a similar childhood? What would you do differently? What would you do the same? What you love about all that. And that does come up.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that you've hit the nail on the head with that, and such a beautiful way of looking at it as well.
Yeah, do some coaching to understand what the fear is actually linked to, because
Mm.
it could be a secondary feeling about something completely different.
And probably actually is. And I second that, because I think every woman that's having a baby needs to go and do some kind of work with a psychologist, or something that resonates with them if it's not a psychologist. Absolutely, because it's a huge
Yeah,
transition. And
yeah.
before we sign off, if someone told you years ago that this would be your path to parenthood, what would your reaction have been? Because I feel like I know the answer.
Absolutely not. It was just a complete, I could show you emails and messages between myself and friends and conversations where it said, very gently, have you thought about this? And just like, nope. If I can't have my own biological child, then I would rather adopt or go without. It was a absolute hard no. And I couldn't even tell you why.
Mm,
I don't even know why.
mm,
And now, obviously, I wouldn't want it any other way, because if it would have been any other way, it wouldn't be Monty. So that's it. Yeah.
mm. So, what's the one thing that you wish all women knew before having a baby?
One thing I wish that everybody knew, well, I think arrived at the moment because I have jet lag. I wish that everyone knew it's really important to get as much rest and sleep, but that doesn't make any difference. It's just that it is going to completely rock and change your world in so many ways, and just to be prepared to start accepting help or saying yes to support. I don't think I can answer your question very well, because there's so many things, but just it's such a journey on learning to be kinder to yourself. It's great if you're already good at that, but just being prepared to do that. I see the world through completely different eyes, and individuals through different eyes, and things are a lot less perfect than what we think they can be or are going to be. So yeah, I think to your point, like, doing some work on yourself is a really healthy thing to do, just so that you can become aware of your behaviors and your mindset before having a baby. Could just take a bit of the hard work out of it when it happens. Yeah.
Mm. I love that, the journey to be kinder to yourself and learning how to ask for help, because I think that's part of it, right? That the work that you do before allows you to just take a bit of a breath and be kind to yourself. And if you can do that work before having the baby, it just makes it easier on the back end,
Yeah.
because it is a difficult process. And I think especially for women, we are very hard on ourselves, and it's very difficult to ask for help. So I think that's beautiful advice for anyone, is to be kind to yourself. We're not perfect. We're humans. What's the word that I'm looking for? Flawed. We're flawed. No one's perfect. No one is perfect. And we need a village around us. We're connection beings. So we need people around us. We need people to help. And we also need to
Yeah.
be kind to ourselves when things go wrong or we fall down.
And I think it's just really having a lot of this internal dialogue at the moment. Just what is stopping us from asking for help or receiving help? I just don't know why I just continually want to do things myself or not put other people out again. And it's nothing really to do with the baby. It's all to do with ourselves. It's that pattern of behavior that keeps coming up where we still feel we're just constantly holding up this bar to ourselves that we have to reach. So yes, it's ongoing and there's no end to that destination. It's just ongoing.
No, I totally believe. But based on the work that I've done, there will definitely be a little internal part of you that was created at some point in your life that believes that it needs to do everything in order to protect another part or something. And that's going into that internal family systems dialogue.
Yeah, and it keeps pushing up against that and it keeps happening. And that's why in some ways I have to create a new thought process around that. But
amazing. Emma, thank you so much for your time today. I have loved this conversation so much, and just thank you for going to those places and being vulnerable and talking about your journey and your story and sharing that with me. I do really appreciate it because I know how close to your heart it is. So thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. It's nice to be able to talk about it. I enjoyed it.
And if you're hearing this message, I want to say a huge thank you because it means that you've listened to this entire episode. Of course, if you have any questions about the things that we covered in this episode or want to know more about me or my other projects, you can find me on YouTube and Instagram at The Pregnancy Process. For those currently in their conception or pregnancy journey, you can actually apply to join my complimentary but private community, the Preggy Training Crew. And you'll find my community application and social media links in the episode description. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, I absolutely encourage you to share it with other women just like you. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.